I'm Gregory Wrightstone. I'm the Executive Director of the CO2 Coalition. I'm a geologist and expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Let's start with who is the CO2 Coalition. I was founded in 2015. One of the founders is sitting next to me, Dr. William Happer. We're opposed to the notion of a human-driven climate crisis. We're just four of the top scientists, part of our membership. Top left is Dr. Patrick Moore. Notably, he was a co-founder of Greenpeace. He rode those pontoon boats out against the fishing fleets against the whales. He found that they were wrong. He now sits on our board. He believes as we do. Top right is Dr. John Clauser, current Nobel laureate in physics. Notably, he was honored at the White House last spring. After his presentation, he shook Joe Biden's hand and told him, "Sir, the science you're using for energy and climate is just wrong." Joe got angry and told him, "You're just spouting right-wing science." It's hard to call John Clauser a science denier. To my left, sitting here, is Dr. Will Happer. He'll explain his credentials in a bit, and also Dr. Roy Spencer, the University of Alabama at Huntsville. Take a look first at carbon dioxide, some of the big picture items through time. We'll look at temperature, what it's doing in the recent and long-term picture, and specifically what you'll really be interested in is our Wyoming-specific temperature data. And then we'll take a look at the benefits of modest warming and more CO2. Just bear in mind in my presentation, if you see a blue line, it is carbon dioxide. You can see back then, it was about 280 parts per million at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Today, it's a little over 420. Notably, CO2 started increasing in the post-World War II era in the mid-20th century. If we're going to see carbon dioxide-driven warming, it'll be in that period of the last 70 years. But it's important to put this as a geologist in the long-term geologic context. So let's take a look back through geologic time, as I'm wont to do. We take a look and find out that, remember, we're at 420 parts per million today. The average throughout geologic history was 2,600 parts per million, 6.5 times what we are today. And you'll also note that the red dashed line at the bottom, the blue dashes are where we are today. And you'll know that today's CO2 levels are at near historic low levels compared to Earth's history. Notably, the red line is what I call the line of death. And that's the line below which plant life can't survive. We nearly crossed that threshold in the near-term geologic history. If we ever crossed that, that would be a true climate catastrophe. We wouldn't be here, plants wouldn't be here, and we're actually still very close to that line of death. So let's take a look at temperature globally and in Wyoming. This is the Hadcrute 5 data set that goes back to 1850, and you can see we've been in a warming trend. If we look at the long-term temperature history, we find that the warming trend that we're in actually started more than 300 years ago. It predated the increases of CO2 by 250 years. Let's take a look here at Wyoming and temperature. And this is the average annual temperature in Wyoming. This data set and the following Wyoming data set comes from NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. This data begins in 1895 and goes up to 2023. And you'll see the average temperature here in Wyoming has increased a little over 1 degree Fahrenheit in that time. Nothing alarming, but let's see what makes this up. We're being told that high temperatures are increasing. Heat waves are increasing. People are dying because of increased heat. Okay, well, this is what NOAA data tells us. The maximum daily temperature on average has been in decline for more than 90 years. It peaked in the 1930s, and it's been in decline. It's gone up and down, but the general trend is not increasing, as you will hear in the media. It's been decreasing. This is confirmed by looking at the percent of days with temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this is Wyoming data. It's been in a slight decline, but there's certainly been no increase in the percent of days with temperatures over 100 degrees. It's completely opposite of what you're being told. And this, again, is Wyoming-specific data. There is no heat-related climate crisis in Wyoming. What is driving, then, temperature increase? We say it increased by 1.2 degrees, the average. Well, let's take a look at the coldest nighttime temperatures. Interestingly, and again, I'm comparing this to CO2, the coldest nighttime temperatures have increased significantly, and that's what's driving the overall increase in temperature in Wyoming, and that's a good thing. It gets really cold here in Wyoming. I don't have to tell you that, and a slight increase in the coldest nighttime temperatures would be welcome, and particularly welcome by the farmers. What does that mean? It means an increase in growing season. Killing frosts and earlier in the spring arrive later in fall. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing for agriculture. So let's take a look at CO2 versus temperature. We're being told that CO2 is driving temperature. That's the main driver of temperature. Remember I said that CO2 started increasing in the mid-20th century. Again, the blue line is CO2. Just as we started adding significant carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, the Earth went into a 33-year decline in temperature. I graduated college in the mid-70s. At that time, we were being told of a looming ice age. We had just seen 33 years of declining temperatures, and who knew when it would end? It did end, and it started warming. But again, just as we started adding CO2 to the atmosphere, we had 33 years of cooling. This is the longest temperature record available from thermometers, Central England temperature record. It goes back to the year 1659. You can't really see it here, but the warming actually, the little bit of warming started in the year 1695. So we've had more than 300 years of warming, and I've superimposed on that carbon dioxide. I'll let you conclude what you will on the relationship. Taking a little bit longer term, CO2 versus temperature, we take a look back for 1,000 years. We look back to what was called the medieval warm period. The Vikings were growing barley on Greenland. We know from historical records that it was much warmer at that time. And then it was followed by the death-dealing horrific cold of what was called the Little Ice Age. We know the Little Ice Age from historical records was very cold. For example, just south of me where we work in Arlington, Martha Washington loved ice in her drinks in the summer. George Washington at that time could go down to the Potomac and cut the blocks of ice, thick blocks of ice, and bring it up to his ice house. That hasn't happened in 20 years. Historical records like that I like to use to document warming and cooling. Again, looking at 8,000 years of data, we see that, again, CO2 in blue, red is temperature. We have a trend of increasing CO2 and decrease of temperature, completely opposite of what we're being told. And one thing I love to talk about is the close relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. They're closely linked, and we find that each of the previous warm periods, going back to the first great civilizations, the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians during what was called the Bronze Age, the Minoan warm period. Each of these warm periods were warmer than we are today. Civilization flourished. Food was bountiful. Great empires arose. And each instance, when it started getting cold, it led to crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. Cold, in each case, was related to horrific consequences. Warmth was related to bountiful life, great empires, and benefits to humanity. We'll take a look at extreme weather and natural disasters. This is data gathered by the UN. The increase you see from 1970 to 2000 was building out of the stations reporting the data. Since 2000, they've built all their stations. We've seen a 10% decline in reported natural disasters. Once again, completely opposite of what you're being told. A 10% decline in natural disasters. We see that global deaths from natural disasters have declined more than 90% since 1900. There's a lot of things that go into it. Most importantly, it's better reporting and forecasting. They report there's a Category 5 hurricane descending on Houston, get out of the way. They didn't have that in 1920. So that's part of it. But again, it's opposite of what we're being told. We're being told of mass death that's increasing because of increasing natural disasters, just not so. We're also being told the drought will increase. This is a recent global study using 2 data sets, and they report a significant global decline in drought going back over the last 70 years. Here is just misreporting and fabrication of data. This is area burned of the lower 48 in the United States. This is from the 4th National Climate Assessment. The data starts in 1983. And my internal alarms went off when I saw this. They didn't tell what the source was. I found the source and exposed them for what they were. They started their data in 1983, but had data going back to 1926. Is the area burned increasing? Slightly, yes, but they declined to show that the burned area in the lower 48 today is 20% of what it was 80 and 90 years ago. And that's confirmed by the Copernicus satellite data of global area burned over the last 20 years. Again, that confirms the globally burned area is declining. I could show you chart after chart confirming this. I will say that the increase that we see in the United States of area burned is related to mismanagement of our forests, particularly in federally held areas. Complete mismanagement. I won't go into detail there. In the United States, again, we see that the percentage of days above 100 degrees peaked in the 1930s and has been in a decline. This comes from the USHCN data. When I say global warming saves lives, people's heads explode. The truth is, this is the largest study of its kind. Dr. Antonio Gasparini looked at 74 million temperature-related deaths and found that 20 times as many people die from cold as from heat. Another recent study said it was 15 times. All right, if it's 15 or 20 times still, a warming trend would save millions of cold-related deaths. I'll say it once again, completely opposite of what you're being told. One of the greatest things and the benefits we're seeing of the combination of modest warming and more CO2 is what we call a global greening. Vegetation is expanding across every niche, from the near polar regions to the equator. This is a NASA satellite image. The green is expanding vegetation. The little bit of brown you see there is where vegetation is decreasing. We see that tree lines moving further to the north in the northern hemisphere and to higher altitudes. Food production is expanding greatly. These are the top 8 crops in the world by tonnage produced. Each of these crops is breaking records year after year after year, and the experts that have looked at this say it's related primarily to 3 things. One is warming temperatures. Again, we talked about a longer growing season. That helps expand food production. Primarily, though, it's the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's fueling plant growth. It's called the CO2 fertilization effect, and it's something that we're seeing from the coldest countries to the warmest countries like India are experiencing this great boon in agriculture. And because of that, we're able to feed a growing population. This chart is from the UN. It shows that global food production is greatly exceeding global population growth. So if you're being told there are too many people on this planet, we can't feed them, the facts contradict this. We talked too about the value of warming, extending growing seasons. In the continental United States, the growing season has lengthened more than 2 weeks since 1900. Droughts are increasing. And this is global precipitation. From satellite data, we see the precipitation is increasing modestly. This is not Wyoming related, but we're being told that sea level rise will be swamping islands in the Pacific, in the Indian and Caribbean areas. This is the island nation chain of the Maldives that UN lists as the most at-risk nation. It's barely above sea level. And I'm going to tell you something you've never heard. Over the last 15,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. Why are these islands not under 400 feet of water? It's because of a geologic process known as accretion. During storm events, the nearshore sediments wash up on the island, and the island slowly grows along with sea level. Now, they're going to tell you that these islands will be underwater by 2050. Using current sea level rise rates, we're going to have 2 inches of sea level rise by 2050. So what they're telling you is the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put them underwater. But look out. That next 2 inches, they're going to be underwater. These are the falsehoods that they're telling you. And they go undisputed because the science has been silenced. So in summary, there is no climate crisis in Wyoming. There is no climate crisis globally. And we should celebrate CO2, not capture it. Thank you.